Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. A very exciting webinar, and one that's proved to be very popular. And it's called The Right Ingredients for Building Rapport Over the Telephone. So I think a very appropriate topic to go through today. So delighted today to go through the agenda. Hopefully we'll be joined in a short while by Carolyn Blunt from Real Results. Just check, Carolyn, if you're online. Can't hear anything. We'll come back to bring Carolyn in a little bit. And also joined by Richard Kenny from Plantronics, who's going to be taking us through a presentation called Better Rapport by Design. We'll also be going to be running through top tips from the audience. I know those have been very popular with you in the past, and we'll be doing a live interactive questions and answers session. So that's the agenda for today. Before we get into that, just want to share a poll with you, and that is, how would you describe your contact center? So the option, you can vote for all those that apply. The options are quiet and calm, light and airy, a bit grubby, noisy, and overcrowded. So just tick all of those that apply to you. I think this is an exercise we've never done before, so I'm going to be fascinated by the results. What sort of percentage, Richard, would you say would like to come up the former or the latter?
I think a lot of companies are sort of holding back on investment at the moment, but the sort of customer service industry is booming, so I'd expect quite a bit to come up as overcrowded. I'd love to see lots coming up as quiet and calm and light and airy, but I think there's still going to be a few on the grubby and the noisy category.
Okay, well let's just have a quick look at the results there. And the results there seem to be coming up as, quite a mixed picture here. Just share these up on the screen. So the results are 22% quiet and calm, 53% light and airy, 24% coming up a bit grubby, 50% noisy, but only 13% overcrowded. So it looks like quite noisy.
I can have my optimistic head on today then. Lots coming up as light and airy. I like that. That's good.
Quite interesting. 53% light and airy, but 22% quiet and calm. So it seems that they might be light and airy, but they're actually quite noisy environments.
Yeah.
Carolyn, just want to see if we've got you online.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me all right?
Okay, wonderful. We were starting to worry. So some quite interesting feedback from the audience there, and I guess you'll be talking about how whether it's light and airy or noisy, we can start to deal with some of that rapport. Just going to share the results there, and so we're now delighted to introduce you to Carolyn Blunt. Carolyn was voted on one of our polls as the best respected person in the call center community, and Carolyn's with a training consultancy called Real Results. So, Carolyn, if I can pass the baton across to you, and okay. If you can take us through your presentation, would be great.
Sure. You can all see that there. You can all see my screen.
Yeah. If you could just go into full screen mode, that would be great. There we are. Perfect.
As John said, my name's Carolyn Blunt from Real Results Training. And I'm going to talk for about the next 12 minutes really around building rapport and some techniques for doing that. So let's get underway. People like people who are similar to them. That is the fundamental principle we've got to think about when it's a case of building rapport. So this is in life in general. It actually comes from the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, which was written by Dale Carnegie about 100 years ago. But the principles are still very valid. So all the time when we're trying to build rapport,
I just actually read that book during my holidays, and actually, even though it was written a while ago, is actually very, very, very valid still today.
It's interesting, isn't it, how the principles of human behaviour don't really change over time. Humans value the same sort of things over the years in terms of what is polite to do, what influences people effectively, and this underlying principle about people like people who are similar to them is also really pertinent today when we're thinking about personalising the customer's experience. because I want to demonstrate as a good agent that I am similar to that customer, but also the other 200 that I might speak to that day as well. So just some tips about how we can do this in a way that is authentic and it doesn't come across as contrived. We need to listen out for common ground. So we need to be really focused on what the customer is saying to us and what clues and signals there might be about how we can say certain things to demonstrate that similarity. And the other thing to think about is how you do this in a way that is authentic, so it doesn't come across as false. We've got to show it in a genuine way by asking questions or commenting and saying, oh, that's really interesting, and meaning it as well. So there's some stuff to do with your tone matching your words, which is really important. Actual phrases that you can use to demonstrate that you're similar to the other person are things like, I know what you mean, I do that too, I'm exactly the same. Those of you who were on our average handling time webinar a few months back, I told a story about the lady with the glasses, and basically the agent had to wait while the lady shuffled off to find her glasses so that she could read her account number back to the agent. And when she came back, the agent said, oh, don't worry about it, I can't see a thing without my glasses either. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. It didn't matter that that agent was lying and that she didn't wear glasses at all. It was just an example of how she moved and flexed to say, hey, I'm like you. It puts us at ease. It makes us feel like we have things in common. So that's what we want to do. The other thing to think about is how you flex. So it's not that every customer is going to want to have a bit of rapport building stuff or talk about the weather or talk openly even about themselves. Other customers will just want to come on, have the transaction and be gone. So with those people, we don't want to be really, trying to beat this drum of rapport. If they're not into playing that game, then the more you try and do it and they're not responding, the worse you're making the situation. So it's time to know when to sumo that, I guess, which is about shutting up and moving on. But think about how you can match and mirror the customer's mood. I certainly just put a caveat in on this. When we're talking about reading the mood of the caller, using similar expressions, words and tone, the only time we don't do that, obviously, is when they're aggressive. Because if a customer is shouting or swearing, you don't want agents to be doing that as well. So we need to be thinking about this purely from the positive. But whether they are quite reflective or if they're really bubbly and they're really excited and they come on and they start telling you about, a holiday they're going on or a wedding that they're planning, then you've got to mirror that enthusiasm and listen out for the kind of the words and the tone that they use. It's really interesting for me to kind of look at accents and dialect and language as part of the work we do when we're looking at telephone skills. And what I notice is that people like people who are similar to them. So if you've got the same accent as the caller, you've got things in common with them, then absolutely play to that. But equally, it's about flexing away from what might be your natural style if the other person isn't from the same regional area. They won't understand some of the local words or phrases. So that's something that was really brought home to me when I was working in Manchester. Now I'm from Preston, Lancashire, if you haven't already worked out my northern accent. And Manchester is only about 40 miles from Preston. It's not the other side of the world. But I was working in a contact centre in Manchester, and I had a purchase order that I needed to get signed by the big boss. And as I approached, his PA, who worked outside of his office, said, "Oh, Carolyn, you don't want to be taking that in there today. He's seen his arse today." He's seen his arse? Like, what does that mean? She said, he's seen his arse. He's in a bad mood. Oh, right, okay. And it kind of took me off guard a little bit, but I thought it was interesting. And obviously part of my role as a trainer there was to think about accents and tonality and dialect. And sort of walked away, and I was still chewing it over, and I saw somebody else walking in the same direction with a purchase order towards his office. And I said, "Oh, do you know what? Don't take that over there today. He's shown his arse." Which, of course, was inaccurate. He hadn't shown his arse. He had seen his arse, apparently, was the turn of phrase I should have used. And this whole kind of thing erupted about, you know, the big boss pulling Noonies out of the tower block, and it just wasn't great, really, for my career. But it was a really good example that I could then talk about in training about how just a little bit of accent and dialect 40 miles away caused so many problems. And
if you're not careful, I guess that could appear on Twitter. Is the
yeah, thank goodness.
And then it really would go viral, wouldn't it?
Yeah, thank goodness this was before the days of Twitter. Otherwise, I would never have lived it down. I don't even know why I'm telling all of you. But the whole idea about just being aware of the things that you might say and the phrases that might be really common in your contact centre, because you all live and work in the same region, and your customers are coming from different parts of the country or different parts of the globe, and they might not necessarily get it. So if you can listen into that on the call and think about, you know, what do I notice about this customer? You know, what is their accent? You know, and how are they talking? And do I need to dial back a little bit on my regional things? The other point about that was I'd had my first child while I was over there in Manchester, and my neighbours said to me, "What trolley are you going to put the baby in?" Well, I didn't get that. There was no rapport happening because I was completely confused. And actually, that was their word for pram. I was thinking more like Asda or Morrison's or Tesco's. So just thinking about using the similar expressions, the words and the tone, as the customer, not necessarily just with your colleagues internally. And the other key thing around this is making sure we get their name right and that we use it appropriately. There are some golden rules. I've written articles on Call Centre Helper about this before. But my name is Carolyn. It's not Caroline. And as lovely as a name that Caroline is, it's not my name. And if somebody calls me Caroline, they completely break rapport with me because they obviously don't know me well enough, or they've not cared enough or paid enough attention to get that right. So it's critical, you know, and we have all sorts of tips about, you know, how you write that down phonetically when the customer introduces themselves to you. Don't just read it off your CRM because you could get it wrong, especially if it's an unusual or foreign name. So make sure you write it down when they say it and they give it to you in a way that you can read it back and say it right. And make sure that you don't overuse it, you know. We've got to make sure we're not, again, doing this in a way that feels false. So maybe once at the beginning, once in the middle, and once at the end of the call is just perfect enough for us British folks by and large. So there will be bonus points for anyone who can tell me what this is in the panel box. But this is the Tumbleweed, okay? So if you ever watch Shooting Stars, you know, the comedy show Vic and Bob in the 90s, when they told a bad joke, this tumbleweed blew across the set and it all went very quiet and bell chimed in the distance. And around that time, and I was working in contact centres, I thought, you know what, there was a moment on calls when I can feel that wind and that tumbleweed is blowing around. And that is exactly when the flag needs to be popping up that we are missing an opportunity to build rapport with the customer. So watching out for the tumbleweed is absolutely crucial. Don't get caught off guard. So what I notice with this is the tumbleweed occurs when the agent just goes, oh, I don't know what to say to that. You know, I was listening into a call in a well-known organisation that book hotels for people over the phone. And the lady said to the agent, yay, I'm taking a load of my friends away, we're going to York for the weekend, I'm having a divorce party. And the tumbleweed blew because the agent just didn't know what to say to that, you know. It's like, is commiserations, congratulations. So have a list of stock phrases, you know, topics and things that you're going to find challenging to deal with. Workshop them through. You can do this in your team meetings. We've created a very kind of basic table that you're very welcome to access on our website, where you can see what might be some of the standard things people say and how you deal with that. And the worst thing is when people say nothing. And I call that the branch of rapport being missed. So if your customer says, you know, I'm having a divorce party, they're actually offering you a branch of Rapport there. They're giving you the opportunity to comment, to add, to interact and engage back. And if you miss that, well, then I just say shame on you, because it's not difficult to just say, oh, wow, you know, that's the first time I've ever heard of that before, or, oh, I hope you have a great time, York is beautiful, you know. But it's just that being caught off guard that sometimes means the moment feels then like it's past. So make sure you've got them, even if you stick them on your desk somewhere, a list of quick retorts that you can use. Dead air, as far as I am concerned, is missed opportunity. So if you really need to concentrate, and I know that, you know, a lot of us are working in really complex industries and regulated businesses where we, you know, we've got to make sure that what's going into the system is right. You might need some time to concentrate. That's okay. Just tell the customer what you're doing. So just say, you know, I'm just going to go quiet for a minute while I input that information. I just want to make sure I get it absolutely perfect for you. And you've given yourself permission to go quiet, you know, for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. If it starts going on longer than a minute, it starts to feel really tedious for the customer, so do watch out for that. So little and often is my final tip, and that's about keeping the call on track, so not getting sidetracked with long-winded stories. So if you open up something in response to the customer's, you know, Rapport branch, what we don't want to do is then for you to talk about yourself for a long time, or for the customer to then take that as, yeah, let's have a nice chat. I don't speak to many people, or I'm at work and I know I can get away with it. So we need to just keep referring it back to the issue in hand. And the best way to do that is with a question. So you've got to nip it in the bud before it's gone on for longer than a couple of minutes, otherwise it starts to feel really awkward about how do I stop it. So like 2 minutes is the key point to make sure you've brought it back on track, and do so with a question and just say, so you mentioned earlier, and then bring them back to it. So that's about as much as I've got time to talk about today. Like I said, there is a downloadable resource that you can get via the real-results.co.uk website, and I'm more than happy to talk to people offline, whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn or email, just get in touch, and I'll take some questions at the end, I think, as well. Is that okay?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Carolyn. We've had some quite interesting feedback going in on our chat room, the address of which is callcenterhelper.com/chat. That's callcenterhelper.com/chat. About the use of first names. Marlo has said that they always use first name. He's actually calling in from Denmark and says that using sort of Mr. or Mrs. sounds a little bit stiff. Stephen said he used to work in the hospitality background.
Welcome to Britain.
And, Stephen used to work in the hospitality industry, and there everything was Mr. or Mrs. or Madam, so it was very, very formal. But in the contact center, things are less formal. So what they do, which I think is quite interesting, is they address people by the way that people give their names. So if you say, I'm Mr. Jones, then they say, oh, thank you, Mr. Jones. If you say, I'm Jonty Pearce, they'll say, thank you, Jonty, even though, you know, your official name may be slightly different on the record. So I think that's quite an interesting way to do it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we got to a first poll, next poll, which is we're going to look at building rapport. And I'd like to be interested to explore what things that you've done in your contact center to help build up rapport. So again, tick all of those that are valid, and the things that you can tick on are training in soft skills. That could be empathy or listening skills. Things like vocal training on use of the voice and vocal tone. Using the caller's first name. Making your contact center more local, so perhaps home-based or local-based. You know, matching the accent more. That could even be potentially bringing your call centers back from overseas. And whether you've tried reducing background noise. So just like to get you to vote on those there, tick all that apply. So we'll just share those results now with everyone. And the results that come up there, wow, a lot of people have tried training in this. 95% have done training in soft empathy or listening skills, but only 20% on vocal training. I think you might be mentioning that on in a while, Richard.
Yeah, it does actually. That seems quite high actually compared to previous surveys we've done in this area.
Yeah. Only 52% using callers' first names. That seems quite low. 17% local and home-based, and reducing background noise. I think there's a bit of a disconnect between the 50% who describe their call center as noisy and 28% of people who are trying to do something about that.
Possibly, it depends where they started from, really. If it's quite an area place to start with, there's not much room to reduce that background noise, so that's hopefully the reason why people haven't tried it.
Yeah, so some quite interesting feedback. I'd like to drill down on that now and ask the audience, what is the biggest problem that you have in your contact center with building rapport? So if you'd like to type that into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, which is, what is the biggest problem that you've had in your contact center with building rapport? So if you'd just like to type that in now. And we're starting to get some of the answers for that coming in. Tony says it's to do with average handling times. Gerald has said confidence. Trying to reduce call lengths is, says Ian. So I guess that's a similar pattern, that building rapport potentially might take longer. The amount of time you spend with the customer. We're a complaints department, says Dean. Gemma says using first names is proving to be a challenge. Productivity targets. Keith said listening skills and disinterest from consultants in adapting those listening skills. Agents don't empathize with customers is a problem from Daniel. Regaining trust after an issue is incurred. Language barriers, says Keith. Callers start with some hostility, so it's rather difficult to build rapport if the caller's already starting with hostility. Culture and language, call duration requirements. Angry customers don't want to build rapport. Advisors not feeling comfortable with talking to a person. Willingness by some agents. They know what to say, but not always how to say it. So, Carolyn, there's a few categories there of targets getting in the way and overcoming sort of, you know, I guess bringing the advisors or the agents on side. Have you any thoughts on that, Carolyn? That sounds we might have Carolyn might have dropped. Ah, I think you're still muted, Carolyn.
Okay, try that. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I was just looking as well at some of the stuff in the box about angry customers don't want to build a rapport, they just want to tell you what the problem is and get it sorted. I think that was Joanne. And I totally agree with that, and I totally agree, you know, we've done a whole other webinar, like we said, on average handling time and trying to keep it, you know, getting that balance, isn't it, between building the rapport and giving them a good experience, but also keeping it on track and being solution focused and being efficient with what we're doing. And it's a challenge.
Yeah, and Marcus said hearing is an issue they've seen regularly, and therefore wanting to rectify the issue quickly rather than rapport building first. So I guess that's
exactly,
you know, all about listening skills and things such as things such as that. Sanuta said there's elements that agents don't empathise and are perhaps scared to empathise if a customer is irritated with a friendly nature. I guess if customers wants to pick a fight, then you know, they might want to sort of keep on at it rather than keeping going.
Put that on your IVR menu. If you want to pick a fight, press 1.
I would definitely say, you know, don't flog a dead horse with this stuff. You know, if the customer doesn't want to engage in that kind of happy stuff, then just don't bother. Just focus on the solution. Give them a nice, polite and pleasant experience, But like I say, don't keep beating that drum if that's not what they want to play.
And the interesting thing with average handling times, I've seen a number of customers, contact centers I've spoken recently, that have thrown away average handling time as one of their key metrics. They might use it for forecasting, but they don't target their advisors on it or their agents on it. And what they saw initially is that call durations went up, but over time things started to settle out as they actually started to be able to solve callers' problems, and the actual call volumes dropped. So, and once people were sort of trained in how to do it, the actual durations weren't particularly much longer, but actually the first call resolution rate had increased quite dramatically.
I suspect that went in tandem with quite a bit of empowering of those people as well, to give them a lot more choice over how they solved customers' problems.
Yeah, so I think there's certainly some elements in there. So there's some great there. We can carry on the discussion as well on the chat room, callcenteralpha.com/chat if you're interested in taking that forward. So just like to pass now the baton on to Richard Kenny, and Richard's going to look at the way that design has a place in building of rapport. So we'll just pass the presentation baton across to Richard. And Richard, if you'd like to share your screen, would be great.
Right, good afternoon everyone. Thank you Jonty and Carolyn for the introductions. So I just want to start off really with a question out to you all to think about for yourself, is how many of you heard the phrase, your call may be recorded for quality purposes? Now in the past we've thought about this from our own use, recording it so that our own internal organizations can analyze this. Well, what we're seeing happening now is that our customers are using that phrase. They're recording our call, they're recording the sentiments on each of these calls and playing it back on social media out to their friends and their influences. So we're seeing a real big turnaround here about who is listening into calls and how that sentiment from that call is being transmitted out to influence an organization's brand. And for me, one big thing that really sums it up is that from now on, we've really got to assume that 100% of our customer service interactions will be in the public domain. Everything we do, everything we say will be picked up by our customers and can be translated out onto social media and be used to inform their friends, their influences, their acquaintances, etc. So it really does bring into a bit of a sharp focus everything that we're doing within the customer service. Now, I think, Jonty, you wanted to run a poll here, didn't we?
We do indeed, so I'll just put the poll up on the screen, and the poll is who is most responsible for brand in your company? Is it marketing, mainly marketing, split between marketing and customer services, mainly customer services, or customer services? So just
now, when you sort of think about brand here, don't think about just sort of the colors, the logo, etc. Think about, you know, whenever you actually go and do a transaction nowadays, like booking a holiday, where do you go first? You go and look on places like TripAdvisor, and that sentiment on sites like that is part of the brand. So it's your company's or your organization's image in the eyes of customers. And that's just not, you know, like the formal colors, logos, etc.
So I know where I probably like these results to come. Richard, any guesses where you'd put on the continuum?
I think if you looked at this about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, marketing would be 100% responsible. But I think, like we've seen, that the rise of social media means that customer services are having more and more of an influence on companies' image and brand externally.
Wow, here's the surprising result coming up here. Most of our audience think it's pretty even, actually. I suppose there's a leaning towards marketing, but 47% of our audience think it's actually split quite evenly between marketing and customer service. I think it's a fabulous, fabulous result in terms of attitudes there. But only 5% think customer service is the predominant power behind.
Yeah, it will change by industry, so depending on how much of your contact you get with customers through a sort of formal service channel. But it's really good to see that coming through, and it would be good to see if that's reflected at a wider level within organizations, such as up at board level, for example.
Yeah, so very good. So thank you very much for sharing those results. If you've got any comments on those, leave that in the box or on the chat room. So back across to Richard.
Okay, thank you again, Jonty. So the big thing for me about that result is that it's fairly clear there's been a change happening recently. So for me, about building rapport is in two areas. One is getting oops, let's go back a slide, sorry, moving on. It's about design of multiple different areas. And one of those for me is about the design of your people strategy, because a building rapport is all about looking after your people, getting the right people. And one of the things that I know Jonty's run polls on this before is, what do we call our people within the contact center? Do we call them agents? Do we call them call handlers? Or do we now start to talk to them about being brand ambassadors? I did write this slide before the poll went up, honest. It says marketing now has to sort of take a back seat, and that contact centers are now more and more responsible for the brand. So maybe we need to start referring to the people within our contact centers as having different job titles: brand ambassadors, customer executives, etc. What we're also seeing as part of this whole people strategy is that the contact center really is an incubator of talent for organizations. An awful lot of people start off their careers in contact centers, and then they move and they get promoted through into more senior and managerial positions within an organization. Again, if we have a look at what one of the biggest challenges we've got to solve at the moment is improving retention. 20% attrition rate in contact centers, about £1,900 to hire somebody. So there's a really big business cost here for getting the wrong people strategy in place. So if people have a good career path through the contact center, then it is really good at improving retention in this area. So really, when you sort of stand back and look at this, there is a significant change taking place, and it's all due to the increasing influence of the contact center on the company's brand. And getting the right people in at the very start is a really key part of getting that right. Now, one of the ways that we find, and we've done a fair bit of studying of this recently, is what's one of the best ways to keep people and to get the right people at the start, one of those people that can build that good rapport. And surprisingly, we found that the building and the environment that people work in has a really big influence on their productivity, and also on their willingness to get behind the brand, to be supportive of the brand, and to be able to have that confidence to go and build rapport with people. We partnered up with a company called Leaseman. Now, Leaseman are an independent surveying company that look at workplace effectiveness around the world. And we got them to start looking at a number of different contact centers. And when you do a Leaseman survey, you end up with a number out of 100. Low score is a low performing workplace, and a high score set to 100 is a really high performing workplace. And the survey works by breaking down the brand, breaking down the workplace into multiple elements, and asking how people are satisfied with that one. Now, what we found with Leaseman is that when we looked at contact centers, we asked them initially about working productively. So what you can see on screen at the moment on the left-hand side is there's a real close link between people who've got this low Leaseman index and people who find that they are not working productively. So there were a number of contact centers here that we interviewed, and we found that they weren't very satisfied with their environment, and that really caused them to feel like they weren't working productively. If you look on the flip side of that, on the right-hand side of the screen, a couple of people with really high scores, very satisfied with their workplace, and the perception was that those people felt they were working really productively in that particular environment. Now, if we move on to ask the sort of next question, which is all about how the environment helps the corporate image. And if you're hiring the right people, you really want them to be part of the brand. You want them to be able to be confident in what the brand does and be able to have that long-term ability to build rapport. So when we ask people about does their workplace have a positive impact on the organization's corporate image, again, you've got those same two clients who had the low Leaseman score on the left-hand side. Barely over 50% of those people felt like their organization reflected well on their workplace reflected well on their corporate image. Whereas if you look on the right, those people working in those organizations were absolutely solidly behind the brand. They really had confidence in what the brand stood for and what it delivered, and so they were able to be confident in talking to customers and be enthusiastic about the brand. So again, you've got that willingness to start building up a rapport there with customers because you're standing on a really confident foot in having that confidence in the brand there. Now, one of the areas we looked at and sort of said, okay, well, that's all very well, but how do you then start to say what's a good environment for people to work in? And one of the areas that we've looked at globally is actually home working. This is a pretty hot topic at the moment in the UK, but it's been a topic that's been in place in the US for a number of years now. So we asked an organisation, At Home Customer Contacts, to do a case study and survey with us and look at how does working at home impact on an employee and on an organisation. So you can see on screen there, there's a really strong increase in the number of calls per hour, strong increase in revenue per hour, and a big reduction in budget. But what At-Home Customer Contacts also found was a 20% increase in employee satisfaction through working at home, and also a 20 to 50% reduction in attrition through working at home. So when you put this strategy in place to find the right people, you want to be sure that you can keep those people and keep them happy. And what we found is there is a direct link from working at home in a contact center environment into being able to keep people longer term within the company.
There's some quite interesting different age profiles as well. Some of the studies I've seen, the average age of call center advisor is 25 or under. For an at-home advisor, it's 35 or older.
It is 35 or older. They're also a level higher in education, and generally they've got a lot more life experience. They're returning to the workforce from doing something else, so maybe having children, a career break, for example. So there's a whole different skill set there. It's not about following procedures. It's about building support, or building rapport with people, engaging with people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on from that design of the environment that people have to work in now, I want to sort of go looking at the product, and you'll forgive us here for getting a bit of a bee in our bonnet about this. You've heard this from Plantronics before, and you'll probably hear it again, but for me, getting the basics right is a really simple, important step to do. And I'm going to pull up Jonty in a minute because one of his slides has a picture of a headset with the microphone pulled off completely. But I'm a sort of follower of cycling, and British cycling has had a lot of success recently through following what it calls marginal gains, which rather than going for one big wow factor, it goes for lots and lots of small little incremental improvements, and those add up to a really big improvement when you take them all together. So for me, getting the basics right is a really simple way for you to improve that rapport. And the reason we talk about this, we're going to do a poll at this point here. So if I pop the poll up and transfer over to Jonty a minute, I'll carry on talking.
Okay, the poll is going to be about looking at the headsets that you use in your environment. So we're going to do a poll that says, what sort of headsets do you use? I think you can tick on multiple answers on this one. The choices are single ear headsets that go into two ears, called binaural, I think is the technical term.
That's the technical term, yep.
Corded headsets, wireless headsets, or noise cancelling headsets. So if you'd just like to share that, which type of headsets you use in your contact center. So if there's anything that, any option we haven't put on there, if you'd like to leave that into the comments box. I think we've got most people voted now. So we'll just share the results. Wow, some surprises here. I would have said it would be almost exclusively single ear, but actually 47% of people are offering dual ear headsets.
Yeah, I think there's quite a trend there to having that. In the UK, it always has been traditionally been the sort of the single earpiece, but more and more as people need to concentrate on complex solutions, the easy stuff is being done through self-service. More complex calls are coming through to the call center, so your employees there need to concentrate an awful lot more. So it's good to see that rise in the dual earpiece headsets coming through.
Carolyn, I think you're quite a fan of dual ear headsets.
I'm a massive fan of them. Lots of people come on our courses, we're talking about how to develop listening skills, and they're saying, yeah, but it's so noisy and it's so distracting and there's multiple conversations that are all very similar happening all around you. It's very distracting. And I think the dual headsets are a great way of getting rid of some of that. And I'm also really pleased about the wireless take-up. That's increasing as well, and I'm a massive fan of giving agents a bit of freedom just from the physical connectivity of the wire. I think even if it's just a psychological thing, in terms of freedom, is great.
Fabulous. Thanks, Carolyn. Well, the reason we talk about getting the basics right is that no matter how many call centers I visit or how many photo shoots I see, I still see people getting the headset in the wrong place. So this is one of those improvements that can really cost you nothing, apart from 30 minutes maximum spent walking around your call center just looking at how people have got their headsets in place. But we see headsets misplaced so often. And just getting the microphone in the right place means your employees can be heard so much more above any background noise. So you can't build rapport up if the agent or if the call handler cannot be heard by the customer. So for me, this is a really simple improvement that you can all go and do straight away that costs nothing at the moment. If you need any help in sort of figuring out what the best positioning is, there's a number of links on our Plantronics website that show you how to position that headset correctly. So there's a number of videos available. Now we look at sort of getting the basics right again. Types of headsets. There's an awful lot more headsets coming onto the market at the moment, and a lot of these are really good for gaming, for multimedia, etc. And when you look at those sort of headsets, they look really nice design, but they are really suited most to listening to music or to listening. Can I get you to pop on mute, please, Carolyn? I can hear you typing. Those headsets are really designed for multimedia, for gaming, for really big, bassy sound effects, etc. It's a whole different headset design that is set up for listening to voice. When you're hearing me now, you're hearing mostly about my consonants, the hard sounds within speech. And those are drawn out best by voice-specific headsets. So if you're looking at all these different headsets types that are out there at the moment, your best bet is still the traditional voice type of headsets, because those are designed to aid intelligibility and help you hear the customers best. There's a good proportion of you use noise cancelling. It's about 21% of you. So I think this here again is one of those simple improvements that can be made that can really improve that rapport. Again, you can't build up rapport if the call handler can't be heard by the agent. Many of you complain of noise. You're moving over to the dual earpiece headsets. Well, put yourself in the customer's shoes. If they're calling in and all of a sudden they're met with a wall of noise, a really busy call center, they're going to think, I'm just being dealt with by a machine here, and they're going to put the walls up and say they don't want to build any rapport with you. Whereas if you're using a noise cancelling headset, it's just the call handler's voice that can be heard by that customer. It feels like a one-on-one conversation. It's much more conducive to building that rapport when it's one-to-one rather than one to just a machine almost, is what some people feel like. Background noise we've mentioned. It's a fairly major problem that's pulled out in the Leesman Index on a regular basis. People are dissatisfied with the level of background noise that's being heard. So if you're on Twitter, have a look at some of the photos that Jonty or I have published today, and have a look at some of the technology that's on the walls in our acoustic lab here in Plantronics. That's the level that you can sometimes go to really reduce a lot of that background noise. If you can do that, if you've got the control over doing that, it's brilliant. There's a whole ABC of background noise reduction, which is absorption, blocking, and control. But it's quite a big step to put that throughout your contact center. But it really does pay dividends when your call handlers can hear customers properly, and the customers coming in can hear the call handlers properly as well.
And we've got a comment in from Mark, who said he thinks we should point out there's two main types of headsets: over the ear and on the ear. It says over the ear tends to do a much better job of blocking out background noise.
Yes, so some of the larger ear cushion types that you can get will block out the background noise physically. So if you have a look at things like the Bose quiet comfort headsets that people use on planes, they physically seal around the ear. But those are quite good for short times. What we tend to find in contact centers is if people wear those for a long period, they can get a bit hot. So it's getting that right balance on the sizing. Absolutely. Okay, last slide from me. Carolyn talked a little bit about this one as well, is that we know that you can put all the right technology in place, but if you're not a particularly natural speaker, then there is a big problem building rapport and engagement there. So Plantronics have partnered up with a speech training company called Crawford Communications to really look at how employees can be coached on how to use their voice more effectively and more engagingly. There's research, it's not quite as old as Carnegie's book, but it's about 50 years old now, from Morabian, about the influence of tone of voice in how people are perceived. And it's when there isn't any physical presence in a room, you're talking on a telephone, then the importance of tone of voice is huge within conversations. So the training course that we've got put together really teaches people how to modulate their voice, the power, the pitch, the pace, and adding in pauses to really get that effect and get that engagement going with the customers. So really there's two key elements here in the sort of building rapport by design. One is the design of the environment, getting that environment right for the people that you really want to hire to come and work in, and getting them supporting the brand through that environment. And the second is the design of the headsets. You cannot build rapport if you cannot be heard. So simple things like getting the headset in the right place and using really good quality dual earpiece, noise cancelling headsets will really get your message across to your customers.
Thank you for that, Richard. And quite an interesting effect on noise cancelling headsets, your last point there, is what I've tended to find in contact centres that use them, because the noise cancelling cuts out some of the background noise, agents don't then shout at people. So actually that brings down the background noise in the call centre, which also has an added benefit. There's less background.
Yep, you tell them what they're using, you tell them they don't have to speak as highly, and it really does have that good effect across the whole contact centre.
Okay, well thank you very much for that, Richard. It's now your turn in the audience to share your tips for building rapport. We've got a bottle of champagne for the best tip. We've had quite a number sent in already today, so there's a bit more competition than normal. But I think the chances of winning it are still fairly good. So let's just pull up a couple of tips. Tony has said, always start the call with a smile. The customer will notice that. Will notice this. I think certainly smiling as you talk is quite interesting, though when you're 20 calls through your shift is sometimes a little easy to forget that. And a very long one from here, Michael, pace and lead. This technique is extremely useful when someone is in an unresourceful, overexcited state. They will be talking very fast in a disordered way and may become frustrated if you respond slowly and calmly straight away. Start by evincing urgency, confidence, and concern in your speech patterns, and manner to match and reassure them.
I think that goes back to Carolyn's point about matching. You know, people like to get on with people that are like them, so mimicking their speech techniques sometimes is a good way to do that.
And then beginning to calm down as you get further into the call. Carolyn, this sort of sounds like something very much up your street.
Yeah, definitely. And it's the whole idea about the leading part is taking them where you want them to go. So if you've got someone who's angry and you go quiet, quieter in your volume, then it encourages them to come down a few notches as well, rather than behaviour breeds behaviour. So if you match aggression with aggression, it just escalates.
And Joanne has said, always talk to customers the way you would like to be spoken to. Don't take things personally. Certainly there's always a danger of that. And Stephen's quite interesting comment here. Our call centre is in Northern Ireland. We deal with customers from all over the world. Customers love this and find it very endearing. Although sometimes it can pose its own problems, as dialogue and pace can vary with the rest of the UK. Colloquiums such as crack can sometimes be problematic too.
Yeah, when we did the webinar last year, we had Dr. Hazlett from Northern Ireland on. So the pace in speech is very different in Northern Ireland, and sometimes they're actually a little bit quieter as well. But I think this goes back years. I remember BT did research on trustable accents. Yeah. And the Gaelic, the Scottish, the Northern Ireland are a very trustable accent for a lot of people.
Jason Manford tells a good joke. When you phone up and the contact centre you're often handled overseas, you phone up to complain. You're often answered in Dublin by someone who says, "Oh, it's a real shame you're about to leave us. I was just about to send you a birthday card." So enough of my bad accents there.
He's ex-call centre, Jason Manford, as well. We've got a few celebrities out there who've worked in the industry.
Stephen says some agents may be reluctant to show too much of their own personality on phone calls. Also, they may be worried that they do not have anything in common with their customers to try and build a rapport. Our contact centre is based on a particular sport. The agents with the best customer service skills aren't always interested in the sport like our customers. So that was quite a common theme, Carolyn, in terms of agent reluctance to be involved in rapport. How have you managed to overcome that?
Well, I don't think it's about telling them your last name and where you live and too much of that about yourself. It's really about the customer. So it's more about turning the conversation onto them, and then you contributing a little and oiling those wheels but it's not really about you, so take that focus and pressure off yourself anyway.
So Gareth has said, encourage agents to make rapport by encouraging them to imagine whether themselves in the customer's shoes, or if they're struggling to display empathy, ask them to imagine the customer as a close family or friend. So I think that's quite good, as long as you get on with your family. Michael says, every customer, particularly in an emergency situation, will have a list of priorities. Making them our priorities and dressing them in the right order, technique known as mirroring them, will reassure them that we know what they want and we're taking care of them. Certainly, I think, Carolyn, you mentioned there was an element of matching your voice with people.
I think that's a really good one, because it's not about you jumping to conclusions as well. And because the last call you dealt with, it needed X, Y, Z, doesn't mean that this call will, because that customer might want it Z, X, Y. So yeah, that's a good one.
I think it's another tip from Joanne. Give your name at the end of a call, inviting the customer to ask for you again. I don't get that a lot, Richard, in contact centres I call.
No. Again, it's kind of a link to different industries, but if the NHS had a sort of named nurse that looked after you for a while, so that continuity was good. You build up a rapport over the longer term, so that's a good one, actually.
Yeah, Tony says, listen to the customer and always be friendly and helpful. Marcus said, I always ask the customer if anything else I can do for them at the end of the call. Yep. Smile can be heard on the phone. We've had that one before. Making sure you talk to a customer with respect in a common language, not talking down or over a customer.
Yeah, it's a bit of a no-no, is sort of talking at the same time as a customer on this one. So that should be one of the big things that's avoided at all costs.
Yeah, certainly on some of the speech analytics products, you can actually get reports of calls where there's people talking over each other. So that often indicates a training issue. One from Lorraine. Gosh, it might take a while to read this one. Internal rapport over the phone for employees who've never seen each other. Also applicable when dealing with client accounts. In order to build rapport over the phone, you have to be mindful of your tone whenever you're talking with everyone. Certainly vocal tone is one of the things you've done in your speech impact training courses.
Absolutely, tone and voice, and there's also the tone of the language you use as well. So I think a lot of it comes back to, you can't script a lot of this. You've got to get the right people who are naturally good at building this rapport with people. So imagine trying to write a script with this that suddenly has to give you, use this tone of voice here, use this tone of language here, etc. So it comes back to getting the right people who are more natural at doing these sorts of things.
And Lorraine's also mentioned crack jokes every now and again. I guess humour is a great way of diffusing things if done sensitively.
Yeah, again, it's in everything in its context is good. I wouldn't want to be a funeral director cracking jokes on the phone in their call centre, but yeah, in pretty much anything else, it's getting that tone right. If what Carolyn said earlier on about if people want to, sumo was the expression used. If you get someone that, is it shut up and move on?
Oh, right.
If you get someone there, then don't bother cracking jokes. It's not going to work. It's just going to annoy them even more. So,
yeah, indeed. Be aware of your intonation at the end of the sentence for questions. Go down at the end for command.
Yeah, that was one of the ones from the speech impact course. It also is, if you get a little bit quieter, it actually sometimes gives a level of authority, so you're going into that command mode again.
Right. Very good indeed. Show empathy. Put yourself in the customer's shoes. Use personal experience. Another customer's shoes there. Know your product well enough to know your customer. This is where rapport begins. Carolyn, I see a lot of contact centres where product knowledge is not always where it should be. And that does create problems with the rapport, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it does, with either product knowledge or transaction history. And it's not always just about the agents in that situation, to be fair. It's how good your systems are and your CRM and things like that. But we need to have that available to our agents to give them the best fighting chance of being able to get the rapport going.
Veronica says, take ownership of the inquiry, especially if it's a complaint. You have to have a one-to-one relationship with your customer so they have a point of contact they can come back to. Let's jump forward a bit. Ask the customer's name rather than the reference number first. It's very easy to get the details we need after we have their name the customer feels like an individual, and agents feel that it's taking to people rather than calls. I think there's always a bit of a danger of that if we're asking for numbers first. So,
yeah, good one.
Jennifer says, allow the customer to rant without interruption. I think certainly with angry customers, letting them...
we call it venting.
Letting them,
yes.
Venting is very important. For those who deal with complaints all the time, and I know that can be quite a challenging environment, a simple, genuine apology at the appropriate time can diffuse a difficult customer and break down the barriers to allow space to build a rapport. Saying things like, I completely agree with you. Carolyn, certainly, on the complaints line, that's quite a important skill, isn't it?
The apology is so powerful for that. It's amazing that a lot of the time we think that customers want, massive compensation and things like that, and it is really the apology that can win you so many brownie points there. But I do kind of have a bit of a thing about saying I completely agree with you. I think you can say I understand and I appreciate, but until you know the full detail, maybe just be a bit careful of completely agreeing. It's just a subtle difference between empathy and sympathy. You don't want to join in with the customer against your organisation.
Yeah, I suppose there's always a danger there. Certainly one of the big reasons people complain on Twitter is because they actually just want an apology. Give the customer a chance to speak. Sometimes salespeople feel they have to talk all the time and don't even catch a breath. Certainly in telesales, I think there's a number of telesales people I've observed over time who are guilty of that.
Well, one of the things I think speech analytics is starting to look at is the balance between people speaking and listening. And is there an equation there that gives good results for people?
Okay, well, let's see if there's any questions. What do you do if people get annoyed? People like people who are similar to them, I think was the comment that came through. Carolyn, any tips on that?
Yeah, that's the caveat that I put in there about don't match them with the, when they're aggressive. That'd be the only time you wouldn't be demonstrating similarity. So if they're getting annoyed, it's about apologising, like we've said, letting them vent if that's important, but then solution focus. So how can we fix it, or what can we learn from it in order for us to move on?
Very good. And Yasmin's also asked, how do you balance rapport building with your KPI on average handling time?
We've done a whole lot of
KPI on average handling time.
I think we've got a slideshow on that, Jonty, already, haven't we?
Indeed, yeah. So I think, Yasmin, we did a webinar called 10 Ways to Improve Your Average Handling Time that looked at that very same issue. So I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today.